Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to send this message to the ICAN Act on It forum. This forum follows in the tradition of important nuclear disarmament meetings held in Oslo. It was the International Conference on the Humanitarian Impact of Nuclear Weapons held in this city 10 years ago this month that changed the trajectory of nuclear disarmament discussions. So-called humanitarian disarmament as a concept was enshrined in the Convention on Cluster Munitions and the Anti-Personnel Non-Mine Ban Convention. That concept, as you're aware, was then forward-leaning in its application of humanitarian lens to the most destructive force this planet has ever seen, nuclear weapons. That process moved from Oslo to Nayarit and from Vienna to the United Nations, where two open-ended working groups considered the question of taking forward nuclear disarmament negotiations. From there, the General Assembly mandated a conference that led to the adoption of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or TPNW, in 2017. That journey is a model of what successful long-term cooperation between civil society and states in multilateral fora can look like. I am pleased to see that the TPNW states parties have continued this inclusive approach in their work. By leveraging relationships with civil society and international organizations, TPNW states parties continue to have an important impact. The TPNW's identity as a humanitarian disarmament instrument is undeniable. Alongside its core prohibitions, it contains groundbreaking provisions related to victim assistance and environmental remediation. The extensive preamble makes clear the motivations of its drafters and state parties. It acknowledges, among other things, the catastrophic humanitarian consequences that would result from any use of nuclear weapons, and the unacceptable suffering of and harm caused to the victims of the use of nuclear weapons, or hibakusha. It also recognized those affected by the testing of nuclear weapons. In their treaty implementation, states parties have taken care to place the hibakusha and all those affected by nuclear tests at the center of discussions. While the TPNW is the most important result of the humanitarian disarmament movement in the nuclear sphere, it is not the only one. Many of its ideals have entered the mainstream. The discussions at last year's review conference of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons demonstrate that deep concern for the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons is shared by a large number of states. This includes many that are neither states parties nor signatories to the TPNW. It is clear that a desire to avoid the unspeakable human suffering caused by the use of nuclear weapons is a driving force for nuclear disarmament efforts. Such efforts are needed now more than ever. Since the invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation just over 1 year ago, we have witnessed an increase in dangerous nuclear rhetoric. There has been a further breakdown of trust amongst the two states with the world's largest nuclear arsenals. In the past weeks, we have seen the suspension of inspections under the last remaining treaty limiting the size of these arsenals. Nuclear risk is at the highest level since the depth of the Cold War. But what can be done to reverse current dangerous trends? I see 5 key measures that can be taken. First, states parties to the TPNW should make headway in implementing their treaty and continue to forcefully advocate for its principles. Their unequivocal condemnation of any and all nuclear threats, whether they be explicit or implicit, and irrespective of the circumstances, remains one of the most powerful statements against nuclear blackmail in recent months. Second, states that have yet to sign or ratify the TPNW should make a serious study of the treaty that takes into account its articles, its normative value, and its operation to date. Third, states that choose to remain outside the TPNW should use the avenues available to them to make progress on nuclear disarmament. There are plenty of topics including victim assistance, environmental remediation, nuclear disarmament verification, and further studies of the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons, where both TPNW state parties and non-state parties could benefit from mutual cooperation. Fourth, all states should condemn nuclear threats and blackmail and demand progress towards the total elimination of nuclear weapons, not in spite of, but precisely because of today's deteriorating security environment. Fifth and finally, civil society must continue to hold states and the United Nations accountable for living up to their promises and for making tangible progress towards our shared goal of a world free of nuclear weapons. Though we're living in a moment of increased confrontation and militarization, one fundamental truth remains unchanged. The only way to eliminate nuclear risk is to eliminate nuclear weapons. This remains the highest disarmament priority of the United Nations, and we will continue to work with all member states and all other stakeholders to that end. I thank you very much for your attention.